and you're like the only weekend eat and greet I've had. So we're all doing some firsts today.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. I'm like usually hiding out on the weekends. Awesome. Okay, we are in. Well, welcome everybody to a weekend eat and greet, right? Perfectly, depending on where you are, but perfectly in time for some brunch. Like this is a brunch time eat and greet, and I am fully prepared with my water vase, and I brought a friend to the cyber house. We were supposed to meet up on Monday, but the planet fell in and ate me. So I'm so grateful to have you back, Gray Crawford. Thank you for being flexible and welcome.
yeah, thank you. I'm excited to talk about Mercury here.
Yes, this is going to be so good. And we were laughing and chatting a little bit because this is your first YouTube live.
It definitely is. Yep.
Yeah, so it's not going to be scary.
I haven't done Instagram live either. I don't think I've done anything live on on the internet before.
Wow.
But yeah,
So
definitely first time.
Instagram live will be our next meetup, I guess. Well, I'm super pumped to have you here. So, guys, before we jump in, if you're coming in, welcome. Hopefully, in the next hour or so, we're together. We're going to give you something that is worth the time you took to show up. And if you're coming in to join us in the Eat and Greet, if you will hit that like button, that really helps the channel a ton. As well, keep in mind that we do still have the Kickstarter campaign going. So, if you'd like to fund and support some free astrology in 2021, all of the details are in the description box down below. Love to have your support. And also, it's the weekend. What do you eat on the weekends? I would love to know. Let me know in the comment section down below. As far as the chat today, though, we're getting into some of my favorite territory, the wings of Mercury. This is good stuff, especially because Mercury just goes retrograde all the dang time. You really got to know what's going on, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
we're going to explore a little Mercury today, as well as the retrogrades of 2021, which are significant because we're moving out of the water energies that we've been re-looking over that emotional body for a couple years. And now we're going to move into air. So we've got a beautiful tour guide to take us through. Gray, where do you hail from?
Like originally,
Yeah, how did
originally
you get
from New
here?
Orleans, Louisiana, kind of in the suburbs of New Orleans. And 13 years old, moved to suburbs of Atlanta in Georgia, a little bit north, actually in DeKalb County. That's been in the news a lot lately. And went to college in North Carolina, lived in Chicago briefly, but for since 1999 have lived in Olympia, Washington, and that's where I am still today, which is basically on the bottom of the Salish Sea, Puget Sound, like in between Seattle and Portland, kind of. If people don't know, yeah, it's a state capital here in
Yeah,
Washington. It's
brilliant.
a good place to live to be an astrologer, being Olympia.
Yeah, well, Olympia, the home of the gods,
Yeah,
right? It's just so brilliant. Short of like jumping and heading over to Athens and Sparta, this is the next best. Brilliant.
definitely.
So, how did you get your start in astrology? I ask everybody, and the way we get into it is always so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was always basically interested in it. It always seemed interesting, but I just didn't know it was a really serious art and like how much was involved in it. And really, the first time I got more into it and actually found some books was with my girlfriend in college who actually, so I'm a Pisces sun, that's conjunct Jupiter in Pisces. And she is a Taurus sun, conjunct Venus in Taurus. And I mean, we just found some of those like, just like sun sign things. But it really resonated. And when I look back, I think like that actually makes sense because there's actually a very Taurus Pisces relationship in that way, just with the sun signs. And yeah, then at one point she had a roommate that had more astrology books. And so at first it was just like that stuff, like those birthday books that actually have the one, especially the really big one that actually has it broken up with decans and tarot cards. And, like Linda Goodman, I was able to read that. And then it was a few years later, it was basically roughly around my second Jupiter return when just having a conversation with somebody, they just like asked about my astrology, and it was the first time I realized there was more to it than just like your sun sign.
Right.
And they were just like explaining, oh yeah, you have like all these placements, and yeah, just like instantly made a lot of sense to me. So I just got one of those like, the only astrology book you'll ever need that tries to show you how to do a chart and all that. And so that was how I started. And then it was for a long time just on my own. It's really different from now. This has been like the end of the 90s, basically. And I wasn't like a big internet person. So I was always looking for books, but not really finding the greatest books. Eventually, there was a teacher here in Olympia, Rosie Finn, who also would do like these monthly plant and planet talks with this really rad herbalist, Carol Trezzato, and they would do like the astrology forecast, and then Carol would get up and talk about herbs and stuff that go with it. And I got to, actually got a reading from her. So that was all kind of around like my Saturn return, I guess. And then, eventually I started writing my website and writing on there. I went through a period of learning evolutionary astrology through like Jeff Green, because I had really good friends here that were really into it and kind of got me interested. And then it's probably like 8 years ago, roughly, that I found out more about like traditional astrology and what was going on with that, and like Hellenistic astrology and that kind of revival. And then kind of moved more in that direction. So since I've just sort of synthesized things together, and mostly through my writing on my site is mostly up until recently was always more in the past how people found me and like sought out working with me and stuff just from reading what I write.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. It's always interesting how we get here, but that I think that everybody in their story has this little bug where like the lights came on, and it was like, oh, this is actually a little bit more than what I thought, and I can really do something with this.
Yeah, definitely. It always is just, I was really interested at first, but then it's just continually deepened. And I remember when I got my first astrology reading, I thought I knew a lot just from reading on my own at that point. Yeah, and it just felt like there was this whole sort of fathomless depth that I hadn't realized was there, even more than I kind of realized just from that first experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think in my self-study journey at that time, it was like until I got into something a little bit more formal or sat with somebody who had a little bit more knowledge, I really thought I knew a ton also, and I was like good to go. And then as I got under someone else's eyes, I realized all of these holes that I had, and once they got filled in, it just was like made things more solid, and it kind of changed the pace of my practice and certainly the depth of it for sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
Where is your Mercury? What's your Mercury placement?
Mercury in Pisces, at the degree of the midheaven. It's not, it's pretty, I forget how many minutes off it is, but it's like right there. And I'm Gemini rising, Gemini moon conjunct the south node of the moon in Gemini. So that Mercury and the moon is applying to the square with Mercury.
Okay.
So, it's like a fully received moon Mercury thing there. Gemini Pisces, very Gemini Pisces.
Yeah, I was going to say you're living the Pisces life, right? Like you certainly got it. Well, then this feels like, this is probably going to be a little more than just a Mercury conversation. There's things moving between the worlds and you have access to them quite neatly. So that is absolutely brilliant. So I'm pumped. Mercury is one of my favorite planets. Right. I just feel like even the history, the mythology around Mercury, how it works and how it moves for us, being able to go to these high highs and these low lows, moving between the worlds, and the way that thinking is ushered by that energy is absolutely profound, I think, and how it ties things together. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say about Mercury.
Yeah, cool.
Yay. Let's jump in here. Everybody's like welcoming you. They're saying hello. And So welcome.
Yeah, I can't see the chat. I don't know if there's a way that I can, but
that's okay. You can open YouTube if you want. It's just right there live. But if you don't want to do that either,
it'll
chat
honestly
for us.
be distracting for me, so it's fine.
I'll handle the chat. You handle the slides. So let's talk Mercury. What's your take?
Yeah, should I pull my slides up just to go into it? Okay, cool.
Go for it. Yeah, and somebody in the chat said they were eating tamales, and I'm just a really big fan of all of that. And nice. I can't wait to get back to tamale land.
Cool. Yeah, I have a scone here. I might eat some of it at some point. I'll see. Once I start talking, though, I don't know how much I'm going to be eating. So
that's okay. We'll work it in. Just stay hydrated. It's a marathon.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was going to talk a little bit about Mercury. I think everyone can see the slides. So if you're interested in my work, you can check out my website there, which is just my name, graycrawford.net. And I do have a Patreon there too that you can sign up for and check out. Yeah, but you had mentioned that about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and the fact that we're now in this cycle in the tropical zodiac, that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are all going to be happening in air signs until like the first water one comes in like 2159. So it's a big deal from the tropical zodiac perspective. And we're in this really big air era, and very synchronistically, it lines up that Mercury in this same year enters a triplicity year of air. So when we'll talk about this when we get to the synodic cycle of Mercury, but Mercury tends to go retrograde always like 3 times a year, sometimes it's like 4 times a year. And it tends to go retrograde in the same element each year. And sometimes there's a blending where it's moving between, 2 elements. And like you mentioned, we just moved out of a period of Mercury being retrograde in water signs. So you might know last year we had Mercury in retrograde in Pisces. It actually dipped into Aquarius last year. Then we had Mercury retrograde in Cancer. Then we had Mercury retrograde in Scorpio, and it kind of dipped into Libra. This year, all the retrogrades are in Gemini, Aquarius, and Libra. They're not moving in between signs. So the whole periods will be in the air sign. And so it's actually a really because Mercury is all about mediating and blending and bringing things together, and definitely being a threshold guardian and helping us with transitions and crossing borders, bridging things together. It's just a great link up that we're going to have Mercury retrograde in air signs as we're all going through this collective transition, which I find helpful because I think Mercury retrograde, I think very positively about Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's one of the kind of things that's people just have the wrong idea about Mercury retrograde. There's a lot of like popular talk about Mercury retrograde, like don't buy anything or like don't sign a contract. Mm-hmm. Everything that goes wrong is the fault of Mercury retrograde, and things are just going to be crashing and not working for you. And I don't actually think that's even true. I mean, we can talk about it, but I mean, one thing I like to do is a lot of times when something happens and like your phone doesn't work, just think about the fact that it's not Mercury retrograde. And if it was Mercury retrograde, you'd be like, oh, it's Mercury retrograde. Like I don't even have that stuff tend to happen to me so much. And sometimes that stuff will happen like when it's not Mercury retrograde. And for me, I don't think there is a thing where communication and technology can break down. I'm not like totally saying that's not true, but it gets way overemphasized. And it's not really, to me, the meaning of Mercury retrograde. There is a way to work with Mercury retrograde and align with it. Mm-hmm. That it actually has a purpose and something for you to work with there, and that's what I want us to talk about.
Yeah, and it's always interesting, I think, too, as we come into different experiences, like what are people's experiences with the time frames too, and that is what ancients have been doing forever, is observing, right? So in my life, as I continue to practice astrology, I have to practice the observation of it in my life as well. I mean, I can tell you hands down, if Mercury is going retrograde, things in my business absolutely take a flip around, where I am like got very little forward motion. It all becomes a time of review. And it was happening before I really aligned it with Mercury retrograde. But other things happen, like full moon things, and I am not as susceptible to being caught in that energy. So it's neat, I think, for each of us to take a moment and pause on what are our experiences with the different planetary motions, so you can kind of see where maybe you're a little bit more susceptible, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I know people that have Mercury retrograde that they do really well during Mercury
Right.
retrograde. Like it's just more their rhythm. And
Yeah.
one of the things, some of those people can just have they have a very, as we'll talk about, it's a slower Mercury. It's a much more intense Mercury. It's a very penetrating Mercury, and they tend to have those slow penetrating minds that just really go into something really deeply. And that's available for us during Mercury retrograde. It's not like you're saying, if you're someone that's like really like fast, making things happen and like bam, bam, that kind of thing, like you're going to maybe run into something a little bit. That's not the natural flow of Mercury retrograde, but Mercury has that within its cycle. So kind of like we were talking about, like opening up to astrology. One thing that I didn't realize really right away was, just from more so like an animistic kind of perspective, these are like Mercury as being this living thing we're in relationship with.
Mm,
And we all have different sides to us. And like you're saying with like the full moon, the moon has a full phase, the moon has a dark phase, the moon has a new phase, a crescent phase, a square phase. It's different. It's always changing. And so is Mercury. And if you just have in your mind this like very like fast, direct, linear, more logical Mercury, that's only like one, small facet of who Mercury is.
right.
So just we go through day, we go through night, we go through Mercury direct, we go through Mercury retrograde. It's just part of the natural cycle of Mercury. So yeah, it's really just kind of trying to align with what is this cycle of Mercury. And as we'll look at, the cycle of Mercury will not be doing the same thing other planets are doing. So it'll end up intersecting with other things going on. That makes, yeah, so I can go into a little bit. So I have here just a list of some of the very, very many traditional significations of Mercury. Actually, a lot of these are taken either directly from certain translations or re-paraphrased a lot from, in particular, Vedius Valens. He was a second century astrologer, and Abu Mashar, who's like 8th, 9th century, and then also just some of my own ideas as well as other people. But there's a big list, and it's actually a lot more than this. And I was just trying to think about how to put some of them down to sort of not necessarily categories, and also that would fit on a slide. But there's a lot to Mercury. I think sometimes we just think about it means like speech. One thing I didn't really like from my studies when I was younger was people would talk about Mercury is, and also Gemini, is like linear and like logical and just kind of taking the surface or putting things together. And it's, to me, Mercury is like there's so much more going on with Mercury than that. So like, as we know, stuff like education, interpreting things, communicating, speech, writing, hearing, having a revelation and sharing it. Those are all, of course, really fundamental. Being able to reason, strategize, calculate, survey. And you can also think about, like weaving things together, mediating things. There's all the stuff that goes also with money and mercantile activities, like commerce and measuring things, weighing things. Marketing goes with Mercury also. There's also the entire art of astrology is Mercury, as well as divination in general, working with omens. And then the ones at the bottom that I have here are also just really important. And I think all these things come into Mercury retrograde, but I think some of the ones at the bottom come up a little bit more. I mean, one of the things about Mercury is it is all about arguing, disputing things, contesting things, debating things, being able to put different things up against one another and go in between them and weave in between them and pull something out and always be changing. It's not stable. Things really fluctuate with Mercury. They go up, they go down. Mercury's a trickster. Mercury's a thief. And so during Mercury retrograde, some of those things get really intensified also, where you might have a big loss, or you might have some kind of trickery happen to you, or, things going up and down. You have some kind of communication breakdown or miscommunication. But generally, there's usually something to really go into and kind of dig into there. And just like Mercury's all about, omens and divination, and weaving things together and, getting revelations. There's usually all those things that happen. There tends to be an important reason for them if you kind of go into them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it's really neat. I just approached this down in the chat a little bit, but even just getting to see a list of just words, just ideas. This is an opportunity today to reshape our understanding of Mercury, have an openness to a different understanding of Mercury and mercurial relationship in our own charts and our understanding as even as transiting Mercury, because this is a lot, and it is not just communication, the lower mind and those kinds of things. This opens up Mercury's possibilities in our lives to a vast amount of like one word things that we can take and meditate on and be with. So I love that. Thank you for this.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, fundamentally too, if you think about the sun as just being like this source animating our whole solar system and all the planets, and of course the moon then mediating everything, moving around us and bringing everything down. And Mercury is always, never more than 28 degrees from the sun. It's always nearby the sun. It's the closest wandering planet. It's actually going to station and move backwards to the sun. And so it's only 28 degrees from the sun. The moon is always either coming, the moon's always either ending a cycle and hitting Mercury at the dark moon, or actually right before the dark moon, or basically in the dark moon. Sometimes the moon's still visible though when that happens. And then, or at a new moon, the moon is just waxing at the beginning of its cycle. And so it's always like mediating these things. And that really to me goes with that deeper sense of, revelation.
Yeah.
And it's not always rational. It's not always logical. There's this more kind of deeper prophetic thing going on. You can pick up with Mercury also.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's like I tend to think of the sun, because even when we look at declination, we're not looking at Saturn as like the ruling energy that you're out of bounds of. We're looking at the out of bounds of the sun. And so the things that hover close to or go around the sun, I feel like they have an extravagant importance to us. And Mercury is that message bearer. He's either waving the flag or getting the message for the next flag he's going to wave as they kind of dance throughout the sky. And it's always an important message that I think feeds our sun energy and motivates, right? So this is one of my favorite planets, because I think we have a lot more tied to how we do life from this planet than sometimes we're able to give it credit for. So
yeah, definitely.
Big fan.
Yeah. So just kind of going with that, one of the things about it being so changeable and unstable is that it's the fastest moving planet. So it's actually changing its phases the most. And so the other thing is, Mercury is also the only planet that isn't actually a day planet or a night planet. It's not known as a benefic or malefic. It's not known as masculine or feminine. It moves in between them. And the way that all of those different categories, if you want to try to put a label on your Mercury, you have to do that by looking at the aspect it has with the sun, the aspects it makes with other planets. It's sort of like this celestial kind of mixer that kind of mixes into and mixes up with the other planets. It will take whatever planet it's making an aspect to, it can kind of pick up and kind of absorb a little bit of that quality of the planet. And so, yeah, as it's, and so because of that, it's this great mediator. So all binaries and polarities, it kind of moves in between and helps us sort out. And that's one of the important things I think to really think about during Mercury retrograde also. So yeah, either day or night, masculine, feminine, moving between the conscious and the unconscious, putting us in touch with spirit and matter. How does spirit come into matter? What is, that quality in particular, I think is really important. Because of it, like I mentioned, with it mediating between the solar and the lunar, and this sense of senses and intelligence, conscious and unconscious. The fact that it also is this planet about borders and transitions and stories changing, it really helps us get in touch with that in terms of discerning what's happening in our story, how are things changing, what are, and especially if you want to take it to the deeper level of like your destiny or your soul, and what are you here to do with your life. Mercury being there, and it's always so close to the sun and kind of mediating the moon with the sun, is really putting us in touch with that. And how even if you look at the Hermetic lots, when they give a lot to Mercury, it's the lot of necessity. There's old talk about in a text by Macrobius of Saturnalia, where he talks about the caduceus of Mercury having these two snakes, and they're bound together in the knot of necessity, and they kind of weave up, and where the two things come together at the top. So like on that image I have here, that my friend Bradley Narrigan actually made, you can actually see it looks like these two snakes in a knot. That's like the knot of necessity there. And then when they come up in the crescent, it's like two snakes coming together for a kiss of Eros. And that idea of Eros, necessity, what do we want to do, but what are we having to face in the world, and things not working out? And we're in this realm of suffering and things dying, right? And I think Mercury is like a really intrinsic factor in how we're mediating that world, the world we're in, and the life we have incarnated here. And so when it's retrograde, one of the things that is happening, destabilizing things is actually part of what Mercury does. And so it gets a bad reputation, I think, because sometimes difficult things do happen and things don't go the way you want. You have to, or like you're saying, a lot of times you have to review and go back over something. You can't really go forward before you go back to something else, and then you can kind of go forward again. That's also kind of breaking up this whatever crystallized sense of what we think is supposed to happen, and because there's always more going on than we realize. And so if you kind of work with Mercury in that way, it's going to put you in touch with those things better and kind of figure out more like, hey, what's really going on here for me? What do I really need to understand here?
Right. Yeah, I love that you're like talking about how he transitions, though, because gosh, isn't that pertinent in the world right now? We have definitely been destabilized, and we are making all sorts of transitions globally, politically, economically, personally, within our homes. And Mercury has a big old hand in that. And your Mercury has a big old hand in that, how you're doing with that.
Yeah. And, Mercury likes debate. And so Mercury, it's not like Mercury doesn't enjoy some discord and instability, but, Mercury does not like, in my opinion, just like, I'm right. Like, this is just the way things are. And then just people just like slamming into each other, or just like, not even listening to the other side, which is where we are. And so what Mercury's all about is taking that energy and breaking it up and figuring out, how can we work with this polarity, and this polarized conflict we're in.
Right.
And certainly that's going to be happening this year with the Mercury retrogrades. And as we'll talk about, they're actually lined up with two of the exact Saturn-Uranus squares, which in the USA totally goes with what's going on right now and how this is going to be a really long process of.
Yeah.
polarized conflict and rupturing among the people here.
Yeah. This is not a one and done.
Yeah.
And
No.
thank God we've got some Aquarius. Thank God we've got air on stage right now, because there's a lot
Yeah,
of rethinking, unthinking. It's like,
definitely.
relearn, or what is it? Uncover, recover, discard, right? Like we're
Hmm.
gonna have to do a lot of that, and we've got to do that in air energy for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, years ago, it was Demetra George was the first one I ever heard talk about Mercury being a psychopomp, and there's some really good lectures she has on her site on that. I think they're from like 2012 or 2011 or 2010, something like that. And at least that's when I first came across it. And that was the thing that actually made me understand Mercury retrograde, almost like it just totally changed the way I thought about it. And that's the idea that, one of the Mercury's roles and Hermes' roles is to go into the underworld, to help basically transition souls into the underworld, out of the underworld. Mercury is like obviously the Greek god that can go into the underworld, back out of the underworld, and that during its retrograde, it takes on this psychopomp role. And just in general, regardless of its Mercury retrograde or a different phase, part of its idea of being kind of looking over crossroads and taking us through these different liminal passages, we see that with the different phases it makes, and the fact that it has the most speed, the most change in speed of all the planets. It goes visible, it goes invisible like the most. Like when Venus goes retrograde, you make a really big deal about it, or when Mars goes retrograde, you make a really big deal about it. But Mercury's doing this at least 3 times a year. And part of these big transitions, one is when it goes from being visible to being invisible. Another one is when it either stations retrograde or stations direct. And all of these things, as you start paying attention to the cycle, you kind of realize that Mercury's always setting up these different sort of liminal phases to kind of initiate you through. And you're going to enter it on one side of the way you're thinking about things. And with Mercury retrograde, you can definitely come out the other side really regenerated, revivified, refreshed, renewed, new sense of ideas and things. And so one of the really important ideas, and we'll look at here more in a second, is just that when Mercury does station retrograde, it's always moving from being an evening star seen right after in twilight after sunset into eventually on the other side, after it goes invisible, becoming reborn right before dawn and the sunrise, and being a morning star in its morning star phase.
Sure.
So one of the ways to just first start entering what is Mercury retrograde initiating into is just our experience of sunset and twilight, and these changing colors and the shifts of colors, these different hues and moving in between different colors. And there's a real mystery there. There's a way you can really go into that. And that can be a very profound experience, when you just watch a sunset and you're really still with it and you kind of go into that experience. And that's really entering the realm of Hermes to me. And you probably know that Mercury has its joy in the first house, which is obviously the house of the ascendant. And so it's all about these sort of like transitions like that. So once it goes into Mercury, it goes from stationing into moving retrograde. It is moving slower than it normally does from our perspective. That stationing is really important to pay attention to. I think not like, obviously we should all always at all times be extremely mindful and in the moment, but human nature in our culture tends to be not to be. And, people are often kind of sleepwalking or not paying attention to what's going on. So when Mercury does station, that is definitely a time to just do everything you can to cultivate mindfulness and just be really paying attention, because it's a very like intensified Mercury.
Yeah.
And then when Mercury is retrograde, it's moving slower, it's closer to us, it's really intensified. So there's not as much speed to get things done, but there's this really deep, concentrated, intensified mercurial focus available. It's also going to really pull us within, and it's going to generally tend to be more receptive to going within the unconscious, opening up a sort of symbolic perception that goes beyond words. Of course, synchronicities are always happening, but there can be more synchronicities following that kind of train of thought versus just your linear logical mind frame. Is going to actually, I find it to be more helpful when Mercury is retrograde, just kind of really taking that more intuitive route with things, paying attention to your dreams, any omen happening around you, which of course you can always do, but I just think this is all really intensified during Mercury retrograde. It's also, you know, I don't have a slide of this, and the person I know that does the most work with this is Gary Caton. But they also do the Mercury loops. So the thing is, it's not, we have on our mind that Mercury's like going forward and going back, but it's actually making like loops. It's going way off the ecliptic, or it's kind of making these zigzag patterns. So it's really, it's calling, I mean, it's very obviously just showing us in this, it's moving in the sky that you're leaving your normal path. You're opening up to something new. Mercury is obviously connected to alchemy. So the way that you separate things, destabilize things, in order to bring them back together, purify them through this passage. Especially as it stations and approaches its union with the sun, that's a great time to try to like release things, declutter, reorganize, break up old habits that you have. But at the same time, like you mentioned, if you're noticing, oh, I got to go back and work on this, you want to take that nod like that. It's generally like, yes, it's actually vitally important that you go back and work on that. One thing I often do too is I'll try to pay attention before you even get to Mercury retrograde. So like if there's something with my car and Mercury's starting to slow down, I'm just gonna be like, okay, go take a look at that, or just anything you know that might be coming up that's related to this. Like, I mean, you know it's coming, so you might as well kind of get things more ready for it, you know?
Yeah, I talk a lot about how when we enter into, especially Mercury, when we enter into his shadow time, I'm like, okay, he's starting to slow. So take some note. Just start to slow down, get very conscious of what's happening around you, and that may be piquing your attention for, it needs some attention, because as we get through, that is likely something you're going to be working on, or you can take the time to be very intentional to go back in and focus on what you started to see as the slowdown was happening. And then you can give it the rest of the time on the other side to fully resolve. So being that present consciousness to what is being piqued, like you're talking about, is priceless.
Yeah, totally. Definitely. So just to make sure people understand what I'm talking about, in case you don't know, this image on the left, an evening star. And if you want to know about your own chart, it's always Mercury is ahead of the sun by a zodiacal degree. So, and these slides are actually taken from the last Mercury retrograde that went from Scorpio to Libra back in October, to the wonderful last election we just had in the USA. So when it stations, it's ahead of the sun, and you can see that on that slide on the left, the sun is setting. You can still see Mercury. It's above the horizon. And then we'll talk about in a moment, there's an important period once it gets within 15 degrees roughly or so and goes invisible. And that's when it's really kind of like going into the underworld. And then we can't see Mercury for a while. It's reanimated by the sun. And then generally right, but pretty close to the time it's stationing direct, we can see Mercury again. And on that slide on the right, you can see it's sunrise there, and Mercury is above the horizon. So that's Mercury at the end of the retrograde cycle, like the two stationings.
Brilliant.
And so this is just a graphic of the Mercury cycle. And so if this graphic is attempting to show that the sun is in the middle there of the circle, and the earth is like, Mercury is basically orbiting in between the earth and the sun. So the Mercury retrograde is always going to be when we are, Mercury's in between us and the sun. There's another part of Mercury's cycle that's really important that you also want to be paying attention to that we're not going to be talking about here today, but that's the superior conjunction. And that is when Mercury is on the other side of the sun from us. So I think of that as being more of a celestial conjunction where Mercury's like really far away. It's moving direct. It's moving really fast. Whereas the retrograde, it's moving backwards from our perspective. It's really slow. It's really close to us. It's more tonic or kind of like this underworld earth, like pulling you into the underworld kind of a quality.
Sure.
The other thing that's really important, so then between 15 degrees of the sun is a thing to look at. Mercury's technically going to be visible or invisible different times, different places, but the 15-degree rule generally works really well. And I think it's something you can use and rely on. So generally speaking, once Mercury gets within 15 degrees of the sun, we can't see it.
Okay.
And if you remember, Mercury, when it's closer to something, it takes on that quality. So as Mercury gets closer and closer to the sun, it's taking on these solar qualities. So it's sort of like this solar furnace, just like more like burning things up. And it's very purgative and cathartic. It's like throwing things into a fire. And then it's also basically dying. Each time it comes towards the sun, it's ending a phase. Astrologers love to argue about which one of these is the beginning of the cycle. Being very mercurial for this talk, it doesn't actually matter to me because they're both death and rebirth periods. Whenever this Mercury comes to the sun, it's ending a phase, it's dying, burning up, it's reanimated by the sun. And then so once it starts pulling away from the sun, you're still kind of in this liminal place where things are still kind of forming. And it's going to be when Mercury becomes visible again, and that's usually around a stationing direct, that we're going to be more kind of like aware of, what is this new thing? It's kind of sort of in that way like a new moon. Like the new moon happens, we're kind of in the mystery. The dark moon, we're clearing. We get the crescent light moon, and we're starting to get a better sense of it. The other really major thing, people talk about the retrograde shadow zone, and I'll mention that, and that's important just as far as degree wise. But I think it can be inaccurate to people because I think they think that means, oh, now I'm in a retrograde shadow zone and like the stuff's gonna all start happening.
Right.
Where actually that's like a really nice phase of Mercury. But when it hits the maximum elongation of an evening star, that's the point where Mercury starts slowing down. That's actually the key point of its cycle. That's when it starts matching the speed of the sun. Then it's slowing down. Then it stations. So it's like up high, and then it's going to station and come down, be invisible. Then it's going to come back up, be visible, station direct. And then it gets to the max elongation of a morning star. It's then catching up to the speed of the sun. It's then moving faster than the sun. And that's when we get, that really fast morning star Mercury that I think is sort of the Mercury a lot of people kind of have in their minds about Mercury. That's the one that lines up with it like the most with it. The other thing is these inferior conjunctions, superior conjunctions that happen, they tend to, actually, one more thing about this is for the superior conjunction one, you really just got to pay attention to when it gets to be around that 15-degree mark. It doesn't station. There's normally not everybody on Twitter and Instagram blasting messages about Mercury stationing because it doesn't station, it just moves into the sun. So, but the same thing actually happens there, and it's really important, but you need to just be like paying attention to that because that's another little phase that's important. So those superior conjunctions and then the inferior conjunctions that happen when Mercury's retrograde, they tend to be in the same element, but not always. And it's not like they actually make a perfect 6-pointed star like this. But if we just look at the sign, so this next year, we're going to have all the Mercury retrograde inferior conjunctions in air signs. So they're going to be in Aquarius, Libra, and Gemini. All of the superior conjunctions next year are going to be in the 3 fire signs.
Mm.
And so it actually forms that 6-pointed star, which is obviously a very ancient, like above, below, integrating things quality, which lines up with Mercury. So the ones this year, again, February 8th. So if you have stuff around these degrees, it's going to be really important. And these are all degrees where Mercury is basically being reanimated and being reborn. The ones at the top here are the ones when Mercury is a retrograde. So that's going to be February 8th at 20 degrees Aquarius, June 10th at 20 degrees Gemini, and October 9th at 16.5 degrees Libra. And then the 3 superior conjunctions, which is when Mercury is like moving fast into the sun and direct, on the other side of us. That's going to be April 18th at the very end of Aries, August 1st at about 9.5 degrees of Leo, and November 28th at 7 degrees of Sagittarius.
That's interesting. So I'm just thinking as we're going through this, we're getting ready to have this full moon on the 28th that's going to be at 9 degrees of Leo between the, I'm just wondering if there is a connection that we can find or look at between the Mercury and the moon cycle at this time, between what is happening or ending or culminating at this time. And we can tie that back and take a review of it in August, or see it kind of on fire, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. Yeah, there's going to be a full moon at the end of this month in Leo. And then, yeah, I mean, July and August have a lot of stuff with Leo. I think July is like Mars and Venus in Leo hitting the Uranus Saturn square. And that August 1st one in Leo, just remember that Saturn is going to be generally opposite that. And it's not exactly, but it's sort of opposite that in Aquarius, and Uranus is going to be squaring that in Taurus. So yeah, I mean, there is going to be what happens with this Leo full moon. Yeah, I do think you can do that. There's probably a connection there. It's a year of air and fire. So these are all very like much more, the thing they have in common is very like active, making things happen fast.
Sure.
So probably like change, and it's just going to go with this being like this year of great change, things happening fast and having to adapt to that.
Yeah. The good thing is air and fire sit sextile to each other. And typically when energies have sex, that's all right for us, right? Like we at least are provided the opportunity to intelligently and in an evolved way take some kind of action with it. And as the upheavals are happening personally, societally, we're able to maybe respond in ways that they will be quick. It will be quick adaptation.
Totally. And also, so these are powerful kind of rebirth moments, like reseeding moments. But it also means there's around these dates, there's sort of a breakdown and rebirth of Mercury stuff happening in your life. So wherever you have these signs, just kind of keep in mind that too. Like that's going on around this too. So these parts of your chart Mercury's going to kind of take you through a little experience with these, in the dates around all of these, especially like the weeks surrounding each of these dates, for sure.
Yeah.
And so this one I can do kind of quicker because we've already been kind of talking about it, but like I mentioned before, we're in this new era of air related to Jupiter, Saturn. And Saturn, of course, is one of the triplicity rulers of air signs. So in case you don't know, traditionally in a day chart, Saturn is going to be ruling the air signs or the triplicity lord. And at night, Mercury is the ruler of the air signs. But the air is the element for Mercury, and Mercury likes air. And, it's very mobile, flexible, versatile. And so all these changes we're going to be going through, there's going to be so many rapid changes, redistribution, structures collapsing, so much going on this year. Like you mentioned before, it's a time to really kind of slow down, kind of ground, reorient to what is going on with us and society and personal lives and in the collective during each of these retrograde passages, and really make the space to readjust, process, attune, like recalibrate. And the thing that I think is one of the real issues in society is a lack of critical thinking, and people just thinking that the way they think about things is the right way, and not being open to really testing their theories about what is happening around them in the world. And so Mercury loves you to have a flexibility of consciousness and being open to always continually questioning things, and that means questioning yourself and questioning what you think about something, and being open to other people's perspectives. So if we can step into that, it's going to actually be helpful. Obviously also leaving this big air transition, there's things that are no longer going to be working as well, outdated. So hopefully use these times to kind of, release and shed what's not working anymore, get open to what's happening, adapting and modifying, that kind of thing. It's not this year in general, it's going to be harder to be like, this is what I want to have happen. I mean, you can still do that in a lot of cases, but you're going to have to be open to like things, Saturn, Uranus squaring the whole year. It's not going to all be in your control at all times. And so, you're going to need to kind of move with it, and not just be locked in, like, I have to do it this way. It has to be done, right now at this time. Like, we couldn't even do this meeting when we had it planned originally.
Right.
And and the other thing is, hopefully everyone is getting into some really exciting ideas and projects they want to do. And especially if you want to do something, artistically, or writing or research or whatever it is, these Mercury retrograde periods, I think are really great for like research, and really like if you can make the space to really focus in on something, there's like this really strong intensified focus that's there. So you just need to kind of make the space to whatever that exciting idea or project you've got going, that's lined up with all these changes. Make some time for that during these periods also. And that means too, like we're talking about being open to like, okay, this idea actually wasn't so good, I need to do something different,
That is like it, that's a big thing that I was coming to, even as we launched the Kickstarter and other ideas that we've got going on still behind the scenes, is these ideas that it's like, sometimes you have to launch a big Uranian idea out there. But the key, I think, so much of this year is to not be too attached, because there's a lot of moving parts. So it's very observational, really. I feel like in a lot of the things that I'm doing or that people are doing, and it's like the less deep attachment you can have to some of those ideas, the more you can cultivate the space to see what the right fit in changing times actually is, so because I do believe that for many of us this year, we're going to see a lot of failed ideas. But is it failure that is like, okay, it doesn't work that way, and then you can reorient? Or is it like, oh my God, it's failure, I'm the worst? You have some options where to take it. But I just think there's going to be a lot of not successes in some of our ideas this year. And that is totally okay. We've got retrograde in air. Just step back and review that thing, right? I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Totally. I agree. Yeah, that's exactly it. So how much time do we have left?
Oh yeah, well, until we're done.
Okay. Because what I have here is I can go through each of the retrogrades, and that's what I'll just kind of figure out how much time we had to talk about each one. So you just let me know. But we can talk about each one individually if you want. Maybe like, I don't know, how 5 or 10 minutes for each one, or how much
let's
time
do it.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's give a little preview here.
Okay, cool. So the first one is coming up, and the people that want to pay attention to are when is the retrograde shadow zone? You're in it right now. So we are in the retrograde shadow zone of this one that's coming up. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with Mercury right now. And that's the thing I just want to get across, especially in this one. Like Mercury right now, especially this next week, this is like an awesome Mercury. It's a Mercury evening star. It's increasing in light. It's a great Mercury. It's one of the most positive things we have going on in astrology right now,
right?
with a bunch of difficult things happening. But it is within the degree range right now where it is eventually going to come back to. So we've entered the place where, like, where Mercury is now, we're going to come back to this in February. And so sometimes there are events that start happening right now that we're going to see come in. And I think that's the way to kind of work with the idea of the shadow zone, is like the different stories or events that are kind of kicking up right now, or starting to show up. Sometimes those events really take Mercury getting away and coming back and then moving forward again, before you have better resolution. Or sometimes when Mercury comes back later, there's a really important realization about whatever's going on right now.
Yeah.
So we are in a place now where that part of it is good, just to keep in mind, like, some of the stuff starting to happen now is going to be part of the story. Obviously, it doesn't take anybody that has amazing insight to realize how this relates to what's going on in the United States of America right now. And we're obviously in a retrograde shadow zone, and the events happening this week, we're going to be probably dealing with for at least a decade with the gravity, but certainly we're going to be having them come back in the news, and we'll probably see stuff really going back and forth, through February, and stuff still kind of, and there might be a return to some of these stories that we're seeing showing up, and that's going to be the same in your personal life. So where I forgot to share this earlier, but it's not always exact, but you can look at different sites to find out when the maximum elongations are. But and actually, Gary Caton has a book called Hermetica Triptycha. Yeah, which is like really the best book I've seen on Mercury. And one of the things that's really useful is in the back, he has an ephemeris that gives you the maximum elongations and inferior conjunctions. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Do you want to show the ephemeris?
Yes. And this book is just...
The book is actually really good. I would recommend reading the book, but even if you didn't, like, the ephemeris is actually, it's just like a really useful ephemeris, actually, in addition to a good book.
I don't know if you guys can see it well, but
maybe
it's
not.
Super small, but you can grab it. It is super useful, and the way that he's laid some things out is really nice.
Yeah, it's very useful. Yeah. And and so, but those degrees, so where Mercury gets reanimated by the sun on February 8th around 20 Aquarius. I didn't put on here the degrees of the elongations, but they're going to be sort of roughly around that same degree. I don't remember what they actually are, but they're the same degree. That's what's really interesting. So that when Mercury on January 23rd, it hits the maximum elongation, it's going to start to slow down. That's going to be roughly around the 20-degree range, where Mercury is going to eventually come back and get reanimated by the sun. And then it's going to, go back, station direct, come forward again. And when it comes forward again, starts to speed up. That's going to also be roughly around that same 20-degree range. So that degree range of the inferior conjunction actually has like this 3-pass thing across the whole trajectory of it. So anyway, in this case, Mercury starts slowing down on the 23rd, but it's going to be a week later when it actually stations retrograde. And so at that time, January 30th, February 1st, will be a really great time to be really present and mindful. People that like to celebrate the cross-quarter days, that's the day of the Celtic goddess Bridget. Some people call it Candlemas, Imbolc. It's like the cross-quarter, midwinter date, although I guess technically that's a little bit later in February when the sun gets to 15 Aquarius, but it tends to be celebrated there. And I think that would be a great time to do something there, even if you just have a candle and you're really being centered on about what's going on. February 8th is when we get the reanimation of the sun. February 20th is when it stations direct at 11 degrees. Then it's going to be in March when it's moving direct, starting to pick up speed. And so it won't be until March 12th
Mhm.
that it fully leaves this 11 degree to 26.5 degree range.
Yeah.
So that's that 11 degree to 26.5 degree range. If you have wherever that is in your chart, from right now where we are all the way until mid-March, you're going to have Mercury basically moving back and forth between this part of your chart. So really important area to pay attention to.
Yeah, which is really interesting because I'm just preparing to record the March forecasts, and it's like in March you get mid-March, and there is this like deep breath because you have
There is.
released and revived a little something. I mean, it's still a tricky year in terms of any kind of election, for God's sakes, but there is the mid-March release that I think all of us are like, whew, come on, March.
Definitely. And I think even once you get to I'm a Pisces, so I love Pisces season.
Sure.
But it's going to be a nice period of recovery this year, I think.
Oh my gosh, when Mercury moves into Pisces, I do feel like all of us are going to be like, oh, thank you so much. Thank you for, like where you can assimilate and absorb everything that has happened since last time Mercury was in Pisces, really, and go, okay, how do I assimilate all of this into my life? How do I take the downtime that I need? But also, now what am I aware of creatively that I'll be prepared as Mercury marches into Aries, that I can do something with. So I think the Pisces season is going to be good for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great, that makes me think of last year we had Mercury retrograde in water signs. So like you're describing there, water like brings us down, like things sink down and we have to kind of absorb things and maybe kind of embody things more. And there's like these depths of feeling. Air is going to be those things like, really circulating and moving around. So it's going to be a different quality of Mercury retrograde to just kind of be navigating in that way. This is when Mercury is reanimated, and it will give you a sense of how many things are in Aquarius at this time. It's at that 20 degrees. But what I have here is just some of the things that are going on with it. So this idea of like an Aquarius deluge, just like this, everything is basically going to be this like flooding of Aquarius, where especially around the new moon on February 11th, everything visible except for Mars is going to actually be in Aquarius. The moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. The other really big thing going on is, of course, Mars being in Taurus, which we're already dealing with right now. And we're going to be experiencing this next week, Mars really stirring everything up, and being very disruptive. So in this, once we get to the Mercury retrograde, Mars is no longer going to be exactly with Uranus like it is now. But it's going to come in and really impact the Mercury retrograde. So right around that same new moon in Aquarius on the February 11th, the day before it on the 10th, like during the dark moon, we're going to get an exact Mercury-Mars square.
Yeah.
And that also means, back on this other slide, that the conjunction, Mars is like 16 degrees and the conjunction is at like 20 degrees. So basically Mercury is like reanimated by the sun and then moving right into like this square with Mars. So there's definitely more big disruption there. And it means that
oh, did your stuff jump off?
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious because this actually happened when I was doing a consult with somebody yesterday, actually about the same time period, because their chart was like really, and I actually knocked my mic plug out twice while talking to them about this exact same time period. So it's gonna be so like I already knew it was, yeah, it's a definite thing with this. So like, yeah, I mean, couldn't there be, you knocking out your mic cord while you're live on YouTube, like definitely, and just things maybe getting disrupted. But what's really interesting is it's a real mix. So as soon as that happens, Venus is coming together with Jupiter like at the exact same time, and then basically Mercury moves from squaring Mars into Venus almost immediately. Like within a
Thank
couple of
God.
days, it just goes from like Mars into Venus, and then it goes into Jupiter on February 14th.
Which is
So there's sort of
really
like this big
important.
disruption and recovery kind of thing happening. So
Yes.
yeah.
That's exactly what I'm thinking, because you've got all of this intense Aquarian energy, which is about, I'm going to just say it, right? I'm going to just say the thing. So we've already got that. And then you take the say words planet and square it to the action planet over there, and we can rashly say things. Our relationships can become problematic because I just said what I was thinking, right? But thank God Venus and Jupiter come back around, because it's like, hold on. I mean, that was what I was thinking, but let me tidy that maybe a little bit, right? So it is this vibration in that first like couple weeks it's an intense, a lot of communication, I feel like.
Yeah, totally. And because of what's going on in the world, I think this is gonna be a really important time to kind of like, we'll probably see something like if things are not working, like you're gonna, this would be important to really pay attention to what's not working. But then because we get this disruption and Venus, Jupiter is there really to kind of help, this is a good time to really like just be ready to change, really adapt as needed. And that literally leads us exactly. So we then get the Saturn Uranus square like a couple of days later on February 17th.
Yep.
So this is, as we can feel in the fabric of our collective, interconnectivity right now. This is already happening, but that's the Saturn Uranus square right now is actually going to continue to really be building in intensity until right here. This is when we get the exact first square. So this Mercury retrograde is just really, really, really important. Not just because of this huge influx of Aquarius that's happening, because it's kind of mediating this whole. So everything playing out now with like Mars and Uranus and squaring Saturn, Uranus, and Jupiter. This Mercury retrograde is just like taking us like into it.
Yeah.
So it's a really pivotal time to be paying attention to and making the adjustments you need.
Yeah, and thinking about what we think about, right? Or how or why I think that, or I believe that. I think that is really important right now too, because if there are things or frustrations, I think, that we have as a nation or as a people, and we're trying to kind of push those down, that's not really constructive use of this particular mercurial energy, because it's actually trying to pop us out of the other side and say, here's what's not working about your thinking. But another thing I'm thinking of in the entire cycle is how invaluable the perspective of someone else is on what you're looking at. As long as it's constructive, seek legal help, professional help, an outside third perspective that has no, is not trying to be critical of your life, because we may not understand why we can't unthink what we're thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Mercury retrograde also, don't be like afraid, like, oh, I need to like sign I need to do this, and no, I can't do it because Mercury is retrograde. Because I mean, sometimes there can be issues, and you do need to pay attention. But I've seen so many people make really important moves, like moving into a place or buying something important, that really turned out to be a really pivotal thing. And maybe they had some Mercury retrograde things, but it doesn't mean like it's doomed. I mean, yeah, sometimes you do something, you initiate something during Mercury retrograde, and it's very like, it's not what it seems. You have to work it back out. Sure. But there's so many examples of people doing important things during Mercury retrograde. It's not like it just, you should be not doing it, trying not to do anything. You're going to need to take action and be responding to things and getting the help you need. and all those types of things.
Yeah, it's so funny. People are like asking about your scone. They wanted to make sure you didn't drop your scone.
No, it's right here.
See, this is a very Tauran community. We care about your snacks.
Yeah. Yeah, if anybody ever comes to Olympia, this is from the San Francisco Street Bakery. It's kind of a sentimental scone for me, to be honest.
So you're still not going to eat it.
I'll have some here in a second. I was going to make a point though about the planets becoming visible. That's the other factor I haven't mentioned. You know, the Saturn, Jupiter, they're all going invisible right now, so we're not going to be able to see them anymore. And in this same period, which is like lining up with like this new moon and this all that stuff we're just talking about, they're all going to be becoming visible. Like Saturn's going to become visible. You know, Mercury and Jupiter are both going to become visible. So there's going to be, it's just this big important thing about, like I'm saying, like awareness, like what's working, what's not working. And then after Mercury stations direct on the 20th, which is like the same time we go into like Pisces time, it's just like, it doesn't even make it back to Saturn, but it kind of gets over there. And it's like, then it's just moving towards Jupiter. And that goes all the way into March. And that's like that period you were just talking about. So that's where it seems like, yeah, we have this really unstable time period, but then there's like this, like, how do we recover from this? That comes after that, if that makes.
Yeah, I get that. I have a full feeling of that. It's really, I feel like that is like that whole time frame after we like get stirred up in February. We really do have the how do we recover, like what's next kind of vibe.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, restorative yoga. Bring that into your life.
Definitely. Yeah, so unless there's something else, we can move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so then we got Mercury retrograde in Gemini. So something I should have said about that last one was, one thing that's interesting about that is Mercury's retrograde in Aquarius and Saturn rules Aquarius, and Saturn's in that sign the whole time. So that's actually hopefully going to be kind of helpful, although there's obviously a Saturn-Uranus square happening at the same time, so it's going to be very like disruptive. This one, Mercury's in its own sign. So Mercury is at home in Gemini. This is like straight up Mercury directly expressing itself in the world, which also means we get a very pure Mercury retrograde. You know, Mercury's in its own sign going retrograde. This is going to start on, so May 14th, which is right around the same time Jupiter goes into Pisces, is when Mercury goes into the shadow zone. So it's basically going from like 16 degrees to like 25 degrees of Gemini. So that's the part of your chart you want to pay attention to. May 17th is when it's slowing down. The end of May is when it's stationing retrograde. And then mid-June 10th is the actual reanimation at 20 degrees of Gemini. Then right around right after the solstice, it's stationing direct. Basically the solstice, it's going to be a stationing Mercury. I'm pretty sure it's also a stationing Jupiter then too in Pisces. That's like at 16 Gemini. And then, you know, then we're in this period of, you know, so once Mercury stations direct, you again need to be really mindful. And whatever this new presence, these new ideas, these new conceptions you've been getting together, this is a time period to start, you know, really centering, trying to integrate it, bringing that into your life. And then as we hit that July 5th maximum elongation, you really want to be, you know, bringing it in. That's when Mercury's like speeding up, and you can kind of really be, Mercury's more available, like you were saying before, like that's like the Mercury's moving faster and, you know, making this stuff happen and that sort of thing. And then it's going to leave the retrograde shadow zone on July 7th. And that's the conjunction. So this is, as you can tell from this image, perhaps, this is basically right after a solar eclipse.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a solar eclipse like right at the same time. So that is one of the really important things about this particular Mercury retrograde is that it's during an eclipse season. I don't know if has there been anything you've noticed about that before, Stormy? I mean, for me, it's like when we're talking about the sun and the moon and Mercury mediating these things and conscious, unconscious, that's kind of how I think about this. It's just a much more intensified, unstable thing. So when we think about Mercury with like things coming into our life and leaving and losing things and gaining things, Mercury tends to take something away, but something else shows up. We also think about, eclipse season generally being like this too, just sort of an intensified version of that. I don't know if that's how you think about it at all, or.
Yeah, that's been my experience, is that it is just more intense. But I tend to feel like when there is moon activity and Mercury is very comfortable, there's like an increase in emotional intelligence, right? Like what can I do with that, or what's really happening? It tends to have, I feel like the intensity, but the intelligence piece is like there. And I think that that's really very, very neat, to where it's like this high level of emotional sensitivity, or there can be changeable things happening for us. But it's like, well, what is it about? The ability to question it and be with it at a different level of intensity and judgment, I think is available, which is neat, because at that time, when we've had an eclipse, there tends to be something important going on, whether it's a decision or whatever. So to come at it with judgment that is framed, and I think more clarity is a neat thing.
Yeah, totally. And then, so what's interesting about that is this idea of like trying to get clarity. There's going to be a sort of veil of Neptune, and that we're going to have to kind of be working through here. So I don't know if people remember last year, there was Venus went retrograde, and Venus went retrograde squaring Neptune. We had this kind of extended square between Venus and Neptune,
which felt like it was forever.
Yes. And then actually that was a time, of a lot of Venus retrograde protests and big, massive disruptions and things, and people's getting different perspectives for some people that they hadn't realized before, and that kind of thing. And Mercury was actually with Venus kind of at the same time. And this time it's different, where again, Mercury and Venus are together and they're squaring Neptune. But this time Venus is in Gemini and squaring Neptune is kind of moving through. And Mercury is squaring Neptune, but Mercury's going to kind of go back and forth. And so this is a one that Mercury and Venus both square Neptune again. But this year it's Mercury the one that's going to station retrograde and go through this really extended thing with Neptune. So the first time they square is on May 22nd, which is a week before Mercury goes retrograde, but it's only a few days before the first lunar eclipse. So the Neptune square Mercury is like tied up in the lunar eclipse. A week later, Mercury goes retrograde. And then a week or so later, on June 5th, they square again, which is around the same time of the kind of leading into the solar eclipse. And then Mercury eventually station direct and come back. And it'll be July 5th that it squares it. It squares it again. And that's actually around the same time that Mercury is like starting to hit max elongation and speed up again. So it's actually pretty interesting. Like it really kind of encompasses this whole section of the Mercury cycle. And so like, yeah, I mean, conspiracy theories out there, like, exactly, yes, and people that are just project. So like, and how you deal with Neptune, you can just like project your illusions on people and just be caught up, and you can be a martyr, and you can be this like crusader that's just like, you're martyring yourself for some cause you're self-righteously and dogmatically attached to.
Right.
Hopefully what Mercury here is going to do is like, they'll give you some, so you want to work with this to like, yeah, kind of break up some of those ideas if you have them. And
yeah, Yeah, and I think about, we're in Aquarian time, high social media, right? The like emotional vampires are going to be available, or maybe it's even coming out of us. Everybody
Yeah.
has a season, right? Whatever it is, like the exchange, it's like people become really porous at that time, So it's like paying attention to really what's happening. If you have illnesses that are susceptible to the moving between the worlds, addictions, anything like that. These are periods to, I think, take note of and make sure you're kind of on your A game spiritually, right? Because it's such a, I don't know about you, but I just feel like it's like super permeable. The things that
Yeah.
get to us, especially when Neptune and Mercury square each other, the clarity is
Yeah.
challenged.
If you can remember anything from this, if end of May, if you're thinking about checking Astro Twitter, put your phone down and walk outside and sit under a tree.
Absolutely, because it's like because we
Or
become
something
spiritual
else.
narcoleptics at that time, right? It's like
Yeah.
you spiritually fell asleep for a minute. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. Don't spend time on social media during this time if you don't want to just be annoyed. And yeah, but what can this open up though? This can open up other worlds. This can open up other dimensions of thought. Mercury squaring Neptune. I feel like astrologers tend to just like act like this is like the end of the world and it's just horrible. And yeah, it's not. It's got some difficulties to it, but there's actually a lot of like really interesting things
Creative.
that can happen from Mercury squaring Neptune. And that's definitely the way that's interesting is, opening up to what you are not allowing into your perception. What have you been closed off to? What is your imagination been closed off to? So also like the idea of like reimagining things can be really important here. It could be really great for any kind of, again, like these creative ideas and work. Maybe more with this one from the standpoint of experimenting and brainstorming ideas than necessarily the most like clear, crystallized, like perfect embodiment of something, but just
Love
opening up
that.
your perspective and what you want to do, right?
Love that.
And of course, Jupiter's in Pisces at the same time. So this is going to be a pretty fascinating time period. We're going to have Jupiter in Pisces, which I'm excited about, and a lot of people are excited about. And then Mercury's going to be in Gemini. That lunar eclipse, right as Mercury is starting to station, is ruled by Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter in Pisces is going to be squaring the eclipse. There's probably a lot of, this looks like a period of like a lot of change and transition. But again, with like Neptune squaring Mercury, things may not exactly be as they seem. And we are also, again, the other really important thing is this entire thing, we're building to the second exact square between Saturn and Uranus. So this is going to be, again, a very extremely volatile and stable time in the second really major turning of the Saturn-Uranus year, where we get the second square. So once again, Mercury is just like centered around this. We get that eclipse and the inferior conjunction like right before that Saturn-Uranus square, just like we did back in February. So it's really configured on that. And again, so it's going to again be, I think it's actually a positive thing, really. And in some ways, it can just maybe make things more unstable and disruptive. But if you're taking that outlook we're talking about like, what's not working, what do I need to change, and let Mercury kind of guide you in there. I mean, Mercury's really strong in Gemini. Gemini actually has a lot of depth of thought, of looking in between things, especially when polarized conflict and things are, just things that are just going up against each other. Gemini can really like move in between that, and is very nimble and good at synthesizing and weaving things together. So you want to kind of really move with that very flexible, this is extremely flexible Mercury. Jupiter in Pisces, also in a mutable sign. Jupiter and Mercury in their mutable signs, which I think does go a lot with like, again, this like flexibility of consciousness. and helping us through this massive transition we're going to go through at this time. This could be a time of, I know a lot of people have speculated, like with vaccines and stuff, it seems like the timing might be, I mean, we don't know for sure. There might be something like that we're dealing with here and what works and doesn't work about that, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. Mm.
Want to go to the next one? Or
yeah, let's do the next one.
So then last one, Mercury Retrograde in Libra, end of September to October 18th. This is going from like 10 degrees of Libra to 25 degrees of Libra. The 13th is when it starts slowing down. The 26th is when it stations retrograde. So it's pretty close to the equinox. And that's at 26 Libra. October 9th, it's conjunct the sun at 16 Libra. Stations direct on the 18th. Then at the end of October, it's starting to pick up speed. And beginning of November, it leaves that retrograde shadow zone. So if you look at this one, it is right on Mars. That's when Mercury and the sun come together. So this is, again, a really strong, if you remember the one back in February had Mars squaring it. This one, Mars is like there with it. Yeah. What's interesting though is this is actually Mars. So it's going to be like a meeting of Mars and Mercury, basically like in the underworld. This is not a visible Mars. This is Mars actually at the very beginning of its cycle. So they're both basically, Mars is in the underworld, beginning and ending a cycle at the same time that Mercury is. So we have like Mercury and Mars basically going into the underworld to meet up and talk about, they're going to have a conversation about what's going on.
Yeah. And
so there's a, yeah.
They are focused. Like the intellect of these two together is piercing and strategic and just the word focused is what just hits me here.
Yeah. And Libra is extremely strategic.
Right.
And I think that's the thing with Mars and Libra is more like this like master strategist of like air, and can be a charming strategist. You think that one thing is going on, but Mars and Libra is working you for something else.
Yeah, I mean, and it's great, right? Because they're all up for a little debate. All three of these energies are all up for a little debate. So this is going to be a good time.
Yeah. And so this is like 10 degrees to like 26 degrees of the cardinal signs, or basically the last 2 decans of the cardinal signs. Anything in there, they're going to be really impacted. The interesting thing with this one is around the equinox, Mercury is like trining Jupiter in Aquarius. So there's actually something kind of interesting there where before it stations and it's starting to slow down a little bit, there's actually like a positive Jupiter and Aquarius exchange. But then in addition to, interestingly, there's a real like, volcanic underworld theme, I guess is the way you'd think about this one, because in addition to Mars being in the underworld with Mercury, Pluto is really major here. So Mercury squares Pluto on the 22nd, and then again and then it stations retrograde, comes back, squares Pluto again at the beginning of October. At the same time, Pluto is stationing direct. So when a planet, stations direct, some of y'all might have noticed that a couple of days ago with Uranus stations. It's just like this, like Uranian vortex is just like
open up,
unleashed, and we're just starting to come out of that now. And that will happen here with Pluto, and this Mercury retrograde is like slamming into it basically.
And Pluto is like, rethink that. I am going to challenge your thinking. I also just woke up. Calm down.
Yeah.
Right. It's very it's interesting when they have those meetups, like you said, like right after a station, because it's like planets need a chance to have their cosmic coffee and like get their life together. But then here comes Mercury all swift and quick and wanting to have a chat. We're
totally
think this.
Yeah, so this is and when we were talking about the lunar cycle and Mercury, this is a really interesting hookup here, sort of like the one in February. where we get the new moon. So the moon is receded by the sun, new moon October 6th, and Mars is right there. The next day, Mars is receded by the sun or reanimated by the sun. And then that's right around the same time of, what was the day of the Mercury one? I don't remember. October 9th. Yeah, is the same day of the Mercury one. And then Mars is with Mercury that same day. So right around that time, there's just this really intense. You combine Pluto, you combine underworld, Mars, Mercury. There's something where really being taken to your depth here. But in Libra and the air sign, it's very much to me about like kind of recalibrating things. Mercury can help here, really moving in between like the unconscious, conscious. I don't always messed up with the pronunciation, but it's like enantiodromia of the thing that's the opposite turning into the other opposite kind of concept I often think about with Mercury retrograde in Libra, and just kind of helping us work with that, see what's going on. Definitely exploring like the shadow and the depth of things during this time.
And Libra is really very business savvy, and certainly when we think of global negotiations and, on the global stage, new and different allies and relations and connections are definitely being made right now. We've already seen it. Plus, then we'll have the change at the inauguration. And by the time we get to a Mercury in Libra, anything, we're going to need that help for the negotiation, for the how do we strategize business at this time. And like, just don't forget, if you've got Libra in your chart, give Libra the cred. Libra is really very good at business. Very good.
Definitely.
So the business of how we're going to do business for 2022, we're getting a lot of information right here.
Definitely. And negotiating, being a cardinal sign, so it definitely is initiating things, making deals. This is one where I guess, definitely you can make some deals, but just be kind of checking in about what's really going on under the surface of things with what's going on with all these influences. But there's something just really massive here, because like I said, we have that new moon, Mercury, Mars all happening. And it's like Saturn is stationing direct at the same time. A week later, Jupiter stations direct. Basically the same time as Mercury stations direct. And then when you were talking about the full moons and stuff, then we get this full moon in Aries, like right there. And that full moon is like opposite Mars and squaring Pluto and sextile Jupiter. So that stationing of Mercury, where it's like really intensified here, it's really kind of lit up with this lunation that's activating Mars and Pluto again, which has kind of been a big theme of this. So wherever, and that's, I think the more you can just kind of move with the Mars and Pluto. I mean, Pluto can be really difficult, but like people say, it's better to move with Pluto than like resist Pluto, and just kind of let yourself start moving with what's being opened up. And
right. And at this point, I mean, do you think because Pluto will have, by the time we get to this full moon time, Pluto will have been in its change of direction, right?
It'll have just been gestation direct.
Right. Like you've already seen it. You've been looking at it. And typically when we're dealing with Plutonian energy anyways, it's already been there for a while. So it's like you've had the season of Pluto traveling forward, still in Capricorn. So some of this is the same old song and dance. Then we've retrograded. And now as he's coming out of the station, still in Capricorn, we've been looking at this for a minute, but now it's like a refreshed perspective if we're able to allow it. But I think there's some comfort in it's not brand new.
Definitely. That's definitely true with Pluto. That's a really good point, because typically once you get to this, you've been dealing with this for a while. So it's like you can definitely start moving with it here. There is a new quality of Mars starting to take shape here. So I guess that would be the difference, where Mars is kind of like in this process of being burned up and starting to get a new cycle. It's not, I don't think Mars has become visible yet during this time period. So, Mars is like reanimated by the sun and still kind of like not yet visible during this time. And there's something new with Mars, like these new desires. And I think if you can kind of combine that idea of like the new desires from Mars and then like these deeper things that have been building up over time with Pluto, and just try to pull those together and move with it, and then let the Mercury Libra, kind of get you in touch with all the space around you, arrangements of things. How are you communicating with people, dealing with people, negotiating? Just kind of get through this time, because what the thing is, this seems pretty this looks like, oh, there's a lot going on here. Like the next month actually has kind of a step up in intensity. So this is a period where we kind of takes us into another of the really more disruptive sections of 2021. Like sort of like we're in right now. This is a time period where we're kind of entering another period of the year that's going to be very like a lot of disruption, because in November there's just a lot happening again.
Yeah, it gets
with like Mercury. So Mercury and Mars like kind of stay together. Like they end up going into Scorpio together, and then Mercury and Mars are in like Scorpio opposite Uranus and squaring Saturn like in the next month. So there's a way that this, you really are kind of like getting yourself ready here. There's going to be adjustments sort of needed, because it's just things are just going to kind of intensify the rest of this year. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, and then everybody is out of retrograde. So they're like, oh, we're back. When we get to November, right? It's like, oh, we've had some time to think about some things. Here we go. Yeah. So, oh my gosh, this has been so good. I feel like this has been good.
Cool. Thank you.
This has been good.
Yeah, I like it. It's been good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And people liked it.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's down here. They're talking about we need to rewatch this and go back over. People are going to grab their charts. So I think you've been a very welcome visitor. And this is a lot to cover when we're talking about a whole year and all of the nuance that happens around it. And I just think you've laid it out beautifully. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, so we are prepared, you guys. We are prepared for the Mercury retrograde. So make sure you come back, check out this video often, and compare it to your chart and kind of see what's lighting up for you. And Gray, where can people find you? I know you had your stuff at the beginning, but where can we find you?
Oh yeah, I think I have one. I do. So that's my email, but the last part of it, graycrawford.net, is the site. So you can just go there and see whatever. I'm usually keeping up with at least the lunations. I wrote something on Jupiter, Saturn. I also have a Patreon that you can support me on if you want. And there's a lower level where you get just sort of discounts on things, including the best thing about that one is probably a very, very cheap horary astrology rate with me. It's only, I think, $25 to get a horary reading with me if you're on that $3 level. And then and there's some content I put on Patreon that I don't put elsewhere also. But there's a $9 level where we do a meeting every month, usually around the time of the crescent light moon. And yeah, and that's a nice group of people that come to those meetings, and we just kind of talk about whatever's going on or whatever questions people have.
That is lovely. Well, and it looks like from the chat box right now, people are still very concerned of your scone, but they did say that your website is beautiful. So
yeah, thank you. I have my scone here. I yeah, I took a bite at one point, so I had a bite. I did better just talking and not eating at the same time though. So
it's so funny. The comment down here says scones for all. So the scone is welcome. And so are you anytime you would like to come talk astrology. And I am really grateful that we got to get together and do this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Stormy. It was great.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, we are going to wrap up for our Saturday, our weekend eat and greet. I hope that we gave you something that was absolutely worth the time you took to watch it. And if you're watching back on the replay, make sure you leave us some comments down below, questions, all of that good stuff. We will be back in the eat and greet saddle first thing on Monday, where we will have Kira Sutherland here, where we will talk about the medical houses in astrology, and we will eat and greet all week long. So I look forward to seeing you. Check out the playlist to see any eat and greets that you have missed and get caught up. Of course, go over and check out Gray, see everything he's got going on. And I will see you guys very, very soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.